is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast.
The whole thing was kind of bizarre. It's like they would scream on one side of their mouth, they would scream about piracy, and the other side of their mouth, they would kind of, I don't know, promote it in some way. It was very weird. Piracy did not kill Atari. Atari killed Atari.
I'm Kevin Savitz, and this is an interview episode of Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. Mike West was an East Coast software pirate who went by the handle Jolly Roger. He was, and still is, friends with Gary Walton, whom I previously interviewed. This interview took place on October 9th, 2015.
Antic's not still around, so would you buy the rights to it or something?
No.
Or is it public? It's public domain now, probably.
It went out of business, so I said, Jim, I'm going to start a podcast and use the name Antic. He said, I don't.
Oh, okay. Right.
Yeah. So, do you have any questions or anything before I say?
How did you find Gary?
How did I find Gary? I was looking for Glenn the 5200 man, and I went on to an Atari forum, and I said, who can tell me who Glenn is? And some guy, who I don't remember right now, said, you should call this Gary in Florida. He knew him. So I called Gary, and it turns out he did know him. He gave me Glenn's last name. Gary gave me an interesting interview. I talked to Glenn. He gave me an interesting interview. And also through Gary's things, how I found out about you. So tell me, let's go back to before the beginning. Tell me about how you got into computers. First time you saw an Atari. Tell me the early story.
Let's see. I always was into into video games and technical things, and of course I had a 2600, which led to wanting to find something a little bit better, and at the time there really wasn't. And then I heard that Atari was coming out with computers, and I had it in television, and they were supposed to come out with a keyboard attachment to turn it into a computer with extra memory, and that never materialized. And I remember I had to give the guy a deposit, and I had to fight to get the deposit back. This is probably like 1979-ish, maybe 80. And I heard Atari was coming out with computers. So there was a computer land not too far from my house. I went over to the computer land, and I only knew about the Atari 400. And when I went in there, they had a 400 and 800 right next to each other. The 800 was running Star Raiders, of course, and that was it. I had to have it. So I bought that, the Star Raiders, the 410 cassette. It was probably a little over $1,000, which was, as you know, a tremendous amount of money. We're talking 35 years ago.
Right. How old were you at the time?
18, 19.
Oh, okay. Right.
I actually had a pretty large comic book collection, and I actually sold a lot of my good Marvel comics, which I'm killing myself today thinking about it. But what it is. I sold a lot of my comics to actually buy this freaking thing because I had to have it. It was just, it was sitting right next to the Apple. It was sitting right next to the Commodore PET and all that other stuff, and it just outshone it. There was nothing like it. So right next door to the computer was a Lafayette, which I don't know if they have them out on the coast, but Lafayette is like a Radio Shack. Lafayette is like Lafayette Electronics. It's like it actually started before Radio Shack. It was a franchise. It was a franchise store that sold radio parts and stuff that Radio Shack sold, but they also started selling computers. And when I bought the computer at Computerland, the guy says, hey, 2 doors down, they have a little Atari club. This is all new. Nobody knew nothing about the machine. It was maybe 10 pieces of software out for it. And the guy says, they have a little Atari club. They meet every Saturday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And why don't you go check it out? So the next Saturday came along, and I went down to Lafayette, and there was maybe, 10 guys there, and Gary was one of them, and that's how I met Gary. And that's how I met a lot of the guys locally. And the guy who ran the Lafayette store was a really nice guy. He let us hang out there. He actually set up a little table. He had the computer running, and he was selling blank diskettes for like $5 a piece. And then he started selling software. And one of the things he was selling was that crystalware garbage. Remember that stuff?
Sure. Really
like
low,
Sands of Mars, all the Phobos, not Phobos, Sands of Mars and whatever. Anyway, they were like $50 a piece, $60 a piece. They came in multi-disc in a little baggie with a Xerox instruction booklet, and they were buggy as hell. You used to hit the escape key, and a character set would come up. It was just a nightmare. So we bought a couple, and then someone got the idea of going next door to Computerland, copying it, and then bringing it back to Lafayette and putting it back into the showcase. The poor guy who owned Lafayette, he didn't know what the hell we were doing, but we were spending money. And keep in mind, in the beginning, we were buying everything. We were spending money on everything, but 90% of it was complete garbage, unplayable, buggy, crappy. Mm-hmm. So it got to the point where we couldn't afford everything because, every game was $50. I mean, $50 35 years ago was a lot of money. If games today are $50. So, we just started, one guy would buy, back then nothing was copy protected, so one guy would buy something and then we would make copies and we would all share in the purchase, or we would just give it to our friends. And then things started becoming copy protected. And I remember the first game that was copy protected was Jawbreaker from Online. It was machine language, and what they have done was they had wrote bad sectors to the disk, and if you didn't have a disk with bad sectors, it wouldn't read it and it wouldn't load it. My friend Tony figured out how to write bad sectors to the disk. He had this little pen magnet, and he would just take the pen magnet and go to the end of the disk and rub it around, and it would create bad sectors, and that's how we were able to copy Jawbreak. I still remember that. Tony was a very, very smart guy.
How did you get the sectors in the right place? I mean, because it wanted whatever.
You didn't need to. You didn't need to get them in the right place. It just needed to be at the end of the disk.
I see.
I guess the head of the disk drive would just go to the end of the disk and look for bad sectors.
Okay.
That's what I'm assuming it was. And then, of course, back then we had 300 baud acoustic modems, and there was only one place really to hook up to, which was CompuServe. And CompuServe had an Atari forum where you can log on and talk to other people across the United States who had Atari machines and share information. And that's where everything opened up, where you met people from all over the United States who had Ataris. Some of them even had bulletin board systems, and if you became friendly with them, they would tell you, call my bulletin board system, here's a password to get on. And the bulletin board systems had a lot of copyrighted pirated software already on there. And if it wasn't for the program Disfer, we wouldn't be able to get anything. Are you familiar with Disfer?
No, I don't know Disfer. Or is that the one that took a disk and made it a file?
No, Disfer, which was an ingenious program for back then, was you were able to send a complete disk from one person to the other over the modem. But what made Disfer so wonderful was back in the days with the 300 baud modem, any noise in your house, you would drop the call. Mm-hmm. So you would have to call the person back, and Disfer would remember what track you left off on, and it would just pick it up from there.
Oh, nice.
So that was an amazing program because for me to transfer something to you over a 300 baud acoustic modem, I might have to call you 8-9 times because the carrier would always drop. Mm-hmm. And it would take half a night to get a disc. It's only 88K, but it took half a night. So we met a lot of people, and some of them were very clever people. They're probably doing very well today, like engineers and stuff. And they were just copying the crap out of this stuff, putting it up on bulletin board systems. They were dumping cartridges and doing all kinds of great things with pre-release software. And I met a lot of people through that who I know even today I'm still in contact with a couple of them. And that's really how we got involved with this whole thing.
Cool. So I understand that you got into pirating software and you called yourself Jolly Roger?
Right.
Okay. So tell me something about that.
Well, we had to have fictitious names. Obviously, you didn't want to tell everybody who you were. There was a lot of guys that were
Bob Smith right.
Right. There was a lot of guys who were doing phone freaking, where they were getting free phone numbers to call long distance, because back then a long distance call was very expensive. So that was another thing. Is you could it wasn't price prohibited to call somebody across the United States to get a game. It would cost you more to call them than it would be a game. So besides downloading the game, you had to have a long distance number, a code, so you can make the free call.
Mm-hmm.
Or else it wasn't worth doing it.
Right.
So there was a lot of guys involved with hacking phone numbers. One of the ones I remember was the Bethlehem Steel. I guess Bethlehem Steel would give their salespeople Watts line numbers, or where you can call for free, and somebody was able to get a hold of that, and that lasted like a couple of years, which was great. I mean, we're talking over 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, everybody who owned a computer, whether it be Atari, Commodore, Apple, a lot of pirating going on, obviously. I mean, even today there's tons of pirating going on.
Sure.
But we did buy a lot of stuff. A lot of it was crap, and we just got fed up with it. I remember one of the things a funny story was, remember the program Shadowhawk 1?
No, I don't know that game.
Shadowhawk 1 was a rip-off of Star Raiders. It was written out of all languages. And in the early days, the guy who wrote it, or the company that was manufacturing it, was coming out with these full-page ads in Antic and Analog magazines, touting how wonderful it's going to be, and it's three-dimensional. I mean, we were salivating for Shadowhawk 1, salivating. So we kept calling the guy like every day, when's it coming out, when's it coming out, when's it coming out? So finally, the big day arrives. We order it overnight red label, which must have been unbelievably expensive. We ordered 3 copies. It was me, Gary, and this other guy, Tony. Mm-hmm. The day that it was supposed to come, one of us got a cracked copy of it, and it was the most horrible thing in the entire world. It was unplayable. It was complete garbage. So when the UPS guy showed up with the 3 games, we refused them on delivery. And the guy called up Gary. He had to pick up shipping both ways. And, I mean, curse Gary up, down, left, and right. But these are the kind of things, that really turned us off to buying software. Was because it was so freaking expensive, and only 1 out of 10 games are worth playing.
Right. And,
if you can pick it up, if it was available for free, a lot of people wanted every piece of software that ever came out. They wanted it was almost, nobody was playing it. They were just collecting it. You understand?
Yeah.
I mean, there's not enough time in your life to play all these games.
Right.
You would boot it up, you would look at it for 5 minutes, and you would file it away, and that would probably be the last time you ever looked at it. I mean, that's really what it amounted to. Very few things were actually played. Very few. Yeah. And like something like if it was really good, like Mule or Gunship, you would buy it because you needed the instructions,
Right.
I had a friend out in California. He went by the name The Wizard of Wares. He was a little strange, a lot strange actually. But he had a friend who worked for Electronic Arts. And one night he calls me and he says he had Archon, Rescue on Fractilis, and Mule cracked, ready to go. And I remember I was up all night. He transferred me those 3 diskettes from California. It probably took 10 hours. They weren't even out yet. A lot of these games weren't even out yet. They were cracked and distributed way before they ever came out.
Right. Yeah.
Because they were being leaked, and I don't know why the writers or publishers would leak these games. I mean, let's face it, it had to come from them. It couldn't have come from anyone else.
Well, yeah, but all it takes is one employee who wants to look like a god to his friends, and so he.
Right.
I don't think it was the company so much as people who worked at the company.
It could have been a disgruntled employee. It could have been somebody who was selling it. You don't know, but
yeah.
It always made its way around the country it always made its way. It was like it was nothing that didn't make its way to the general population.
Right. Yeah. There's stuff still today that hasn't been cracked yet. A lot of educational software, for instance, you pirates weren't interested in it back in the day, and now it still hasn't been cracked, and now it's becoming a problem. So, do you have any advice to modern Atari users who want to, might not know all the tricks to preserving software? Because now what used to be pirating software is now preserving software.
Right. I mean, you'd have to have one of these guys who would disassemble, had a machine language disassembler who would be able to get in there and take care of it. I know a lot of the cartridge stuff. I remember one year we went we went to a Atari show, and and one of us was friendly with one of the salesmen, and he brought us up to his hotel room. And in his hotel room was an Atari ST disassembled. It was just the motherboard and like half the case. And the other thing was the Atari 7800, also with like just the motherboard and a bunch of cartridges without the cases. And he was showing us these machines that they were going to be coming out in 85 or 86. Mm-hmm. And a lot of those 7800 games somehow made its way to the Atari 800. I know Glenn did a lot of those conversions, especially with the 5200. But even the salesman from Atari was kind of like, the whole thing was kind of bizarre. It's like they would scream on one side of their mouth, they would scream about piracy, and the other side of their mouth, they would kind of, I don't know, promote it in some way. It was very weird. I mean, the company was run like shit during its tenure anyway, and we all know that.
Right. Yeah.
Your management was horrendous, especially when they sold it to Tramiel. It got even worse. But as far as cracking the educational software, I couldn't help you. I mean, how many people are actually still using their Atari 800s?
Yeah, if you go to the Atari Age forums, and there are many people there.
Really,
hundreds of people still in the hobby. Yeah,
it's a great machine. I always thought it was the best computer I ever owned, and I owned them all.
Yeah, do you still have one?
No, I don't. I gave it away many years ago. I'm stupid of me to do that. I don't have it. If I did have it, I would probably hook it up and play around with it, but I don't have it. But I had every Atari machine. I had a business. I sold Atari and Amiga software for 10 years.
Oh yeah.
I imported and exported to Europe. Yeah. Oh. I imported the European stuff and sold it here, and I exported closeouts and I sold it to Europe.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So like Gary, on one hand you're selling it, and on the other hand you're pirating it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we Gary's a character, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of guys that I knew. We used to have copying parties where people would bring over their happy drives, and we'd set them up in someone's house, and you just go around and talk to people what you need, and I would just copy software and hand it to each other.
Nice. So, okay, tell me the story that just like is the definitive. This is what it was like pirating back in the day.
Well, there's a lot of. One of the stories that stands out was the game Frogger was coming out from. I don't know who was Parker Brothers or Sega. One of those Parker Brothers. Yeah. And Gary had a friend who lived in Miami, which is quite a distance from where we live, who claimed he had it. And if we wanted it, we can come down, and for $40 or whatever it was, he would make us a copy. So we got in a car. We went all the way down. He was in South Miami. I mean, really far away. Lived in an old house. And we get down there. He's a strange character. And we get down there, and we're sitting on a couch in his house, and he has like a bowl of chocolate kisses, and he says, "Don't touch those. Those are my wife's." I still remember this, like it was yesterday. It was like 30 years ago. Anyway, we give him the $40, and he gives us a CD, not a CD, a diskette. Mm-hmm. And we don't even look at we take him for his word. We get in the car, we go all the way back home. We go and put it into the 800. You know what it was? Mm-hmm. It was a game called Froggy by Eddie Fries. Still remember this. Okay, you know the game I'm talking about?
No, but it doesn't sound like Frogger.
No, it's like a 3K game that was probably submitted to the Atari software. What was that name of that thing that the Atari had?
Oh, Atari Program Exchange?
Yeah, it was probably something that was submitted to the Atari Program Exchange. And we were really pissed off. I mean, that was one of the things I remember that was, you can laugh about it now, but we were pretty angry. But we had a bunch of guys who would buy software from us. So anything we had. I mean, salivating. People were salivating. First of all, you have to understand that a lot of this stuff was impossible to get. Not many stores were carrying Atari. Not many stores were carrying Atari software. And people wanted to feed their machines. So one of the advantages of collecting all this software was to be able to sell it. We'd sell it for $10 a disc, whatever it was. But I remember somebody gave me somebody worked at Radio Shack, and they stole a TRS-80 and a Quotex machine. You know what a Quotex machine is?
No, I don't know what that is.
You can't even use it. A Quotex machine back then was this machine that you hooked up to your phone line, and it got stock quotes from Wall Street.
Okay.
It was very high tech. But to be able to use it, you needed an account with a serial number. So it was pretty much useless. So he stole a TRS-80 and a Quotex machine, and he traded to me for 3 discs of Atari software. But those kind of things were very common, very common. People just, especially kids, they just wanted everything you had. And if they didn't have money, they would give you trades. A lot of these kids worked in Radio Shack type stores or video stores where they sold cartridges and videotapes, and they would just steal everything out of there to trade it for Atari diskettes full of junky games.
Yeah. Did you ever get in trouble? Did you ever almost get in trouble? With the cops or parents or just anybody?
No, somebody had started a rumor. Somebody started a rumor that Atari had a van that they would go around neighborhoods, and on top of the van was a gigantic magnet. And if they went past your house, it would wipe all the information on your diskettes clean. And I remember somebody I knew buried all of his software in the backyard. That's how afraid he was. Yeah, of course, it was not true, but I do remember him being very scared. His name was Marshall, and he was a collector, and he had everything, every single piece of crap thing. I mean, he had hundreds of diskettes for Atari, and he had them all labeled and categorized, and don't ask, was the whole thing. And I remember him telling me, "You better bury him. They're coming around the neighborhood." I'm like, "What, you out of your mind?" He says, "No, I heard about it." And he buried him in his backyard. He was so afraid. But nobody cared about it. Nobody cared about the Piracy or Atari. No one cared.
Yeah.
The saying goes that Piracy killed Atari. It could be, that's the farthest thing from the truth, because
really?
Yeah, I mean, because every machine was pirated heavily. What killed Atari was coming out with the same machine in 37 different varieties, and horrible management and horrible advertising and horrible price structure. Piracy did not kill Atari. Atari killed Atari. I sold Atari software for 10 years and Amiga. I never sold 8-bit software. Gary did, but I sold ST and Amiga software, and the stuff was very heavily pirated. In fact, I used to buy games from Europe that were not distributed in this country, and they were in 50 hertz, and I had to convert them to 60 hertz. So I had to even do a little bit of my own pirating to get them to work. But pirating did not kill Atari. No way. If Atari would have sold as many machines as Apple did, there wouldn't have been an issue with pirating. The only reason there was an issue was because apparently they only sold 1 million or 2,800,000, and it just wasn't enough to keep up with the software. I firmly believe that. I don't believe pirating killed Atari.
That's an interesting theory. I don't know if you're
because
right or wrong.
If pirating killed the 800, they wouldn't have come out with the ST. They would have said, you know what, this is futile. We're coming out with these great machines and pirating. It wasn't a blip on their radar. It really wasn't. I mean, I owned the Commodore 64. There was a tremendous pirating scene in the Commodore 64 world. TI-99, all those machines.
Mm-hmm.
Pirating up the ass. A lot of the guys who owned Atari 800s owned other machines too.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't buying software. They bought 1 or 2 pieces, and the rest they pirated.
Yeah.
They copied. Look, anything that's copyable, video cassettes, CDs, DVRs, people are going to do it. Human nature. I'm not justifying. I'm not saying it's right, but there's a lot of junk that we bought. There's thousands of dollars that I spent on software that I played one time because companies embellished and lied and didn't debug it properly. So it's a double-edged sword.
Right. And on the other hand, thousands of dollars of stuff that you pirated that you never actually used. So who's being hurt? Exactly.
I mean, like I said, 3% of the games that were pirated were played with. Really. You ask any pirate, you can go, how many of these games did you actually play? And they'll tell you, next to nothing. What's it? Robert Yeager, who wrote Montezuma's Revenge and a few other things.
Okay, yeah.
I was friendly with him. He sent me Montezuma's Revenge before he even released it. I think he ended up selling it to Parker Brothers.
Nice.
So guys were releasing their own stuff. They wanted their friends to check it out and see what they thought of it. But I had I had all of the Atari stuff. I had the 850 interface, the 810 drives. I even saw a couple of 815 drives with the dual drives. I never bought those. They were too expensive. But Atari did release a few of them. I remember seeing that. And I had the Centronics printer. The Centronics printer weighed 500 pounds. I think it was the 825. I had the 40-column printer. I don't know. I spent thousands of dollars on this stuff.
Are you selling computers today?
Not. I don't. I'm not a computer for a living. I do have a PC clone, and which everybody probably has. I have an iPad. But
what do you do for a living now?
I'm actually a food service director, of all things.
Nice. And you're still in Florida?
Yeah, I'm still in Florida, yeah. I'm originally from New York, I guess you can tell by the accent.
I had a glimmer of every guess of that, yeah.
But yeah, it was a lot of fun. You met a lot of people. I have friends today from it. Gary's one of them. I know Gary since 1980s, so 35 years. And Gary was able to make a living because of his involvement in computers, and I made a good living when I had my business. So, it leads into things. You never know where life's going to take you. And the people that I do know that I was friendly with, they're all doing well. They're all smart people. I mean, you had to have something on the ball to be involved with this. You really did. You couldn't have been a dummy. You had to be technically inclined. You had to be kind of forward thinking and something on the ball,
Right. And yet there were, like you said, a certain collection of just weird people. Very weird. Who were into it. Yeah.
Very, very bizarre people. Absolutely 100%. Introverts, people lived in their mother's basement, those kind of people.
Yeah.
Definitely. And, there was always infighting, I'm not giving you this game unless you give me that, or I'm kicking you off my BBS and I'm taking away your password. There was always that kind of crap going on because, all of these various pirate groups, their main goal was to release something first. Whoever released it first was the winner to them in their mind. Mm-hmm. So they had bragging rights and they can put their names on the game,
Right.
So there was always a lot of competition and backstabbing and lying over. If you think about it today, it's complete nonsense, But back then it was a big thing for certain people.
All right, so if you could send a message to the Atari community that still exists, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
Well, I would say that if you're younger people, you're messing around with a great machine and something that a lot of us had a lot of fun with. Something that we admired and we fought for and we protected, especially during the days when the Commodore people said their machine was better, which it is not in any way, because I owned one. It was a complete piece of crap. I mean, the hard drive was a brick. It was a dumb hard drive. It took forever to load. But yeah, I mean, it's a great machine. It's a lot of great games for it. Other things you can do with it. Just enjoy it. I mean, it's not a PC. It doesn't have 32 gigs. It doesn't have a 6-core processor, but for what it is, it's quite enjoyable.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate it.
All right. It was nice talking to you. Take care.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator. creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.